from an agreement. There's no common language right now. They're still talking about things like prisoner exchanges. Today, prisoners that are highly injured, the Russians saying, let's do an all-for-all swap. That's happened before. That's not cause for sudden optimism. But the fact that the Russians are willing to persist with that discussion, which the Americans, the Europeans, China, India, everyone wants those negotiations to happen, even just 24 hours after Russia's massive strategic defeat at the hands of Ukraine, is a reason to believe that this is an opportunity. Now, the United States would be wise to align more strongly with the European allies to push Russia to the table. Putin sees that Trump has been willing to push Ukraine to the table. You remember that he suspended intelligence and defense aid for more than a week. And that's what got the Ukrainians to accept a ceasefire with no preconditions. It's what got Zelensky and his parliament to approve a critical minerals deal. These are actually positive moves towards peace. But Putin knows that Trump has been unwilling to do that. And as long as that persists, then I suspect that what we saw from Ukraine this weekend will be inadequate to get us to a ceasefire.
Where does this therefore leave Trump the peacemaker? I mean, till a few days ago, till a week ago at least, Trump was trumping around that he alone could work out a peace, that he alone had the leverage to work out a peace. Do you believe that this strengthens those peace-making efforts of Donald Trump or exposes the limitations of what many believe is Trump's empty boasts?
I think your framing of the question is not quite accurate. I think that Trump has started to get frustrated with Putin about a month and a half ago, started to make some statements that maybe he would need to increase sanctions, that he expected the Russians to come to the table. They haven't been, that he was disappointed with those early Russian attacks on Kiev, I think about a month and a half ago. He was very concerned about more Russian attacks in the last week, that maybe Putin is just stringing him along. So, I mean, you're right. If you had asked me at the beginning of the Trump administration back in January, yes, he said, I am the man that can get this done very quickly. Over the past weeks, you've seen Trump, as you're showing in some of your video there, pivoting to the Middle East. He's getting bored, getting tired of the fact that the Putin engagement is not working, even though Trump called Putin for 90 minutes, has spent time with him talking about how there could be a rapprochement with the United States that would lead to America taking their Russia sanctions away, that the United States would invest in Russia, that together they could exploit critical minerals in the Arctic Circle. They've spoken even about maybe an equity stake in restarting Nord Stream 2, the pipeline. I mean, there've been lots of talk, but Putin has been unwilling to do anything meaningful that would bring him to the table for peace. And so Trump has spent a lot more time and diplomatic effort and political capital in the past few weeks engaging in the Middle East, talking about perhaps a breakthrough deal with the Iranians, talking about wanting to have peace and an end to the war in Gaza, the former perhaps more optimistically than the latter, but less time on Russia, Ukraine. And certainly if Putin continues to respond the way he has, and if Trump is unwilling to spell out exactly what the threats would be against Russia if Putin doesn't accept a ceasefire and is prepared to execute on those, and we've not seen that from Trump so far, then our basic expectation should be that Trump ends his diplomatic engagement on Russia, Ukraine, says the Pope can do it, the Europeans can do it, Erdogan can do it, but he washes his hands of it and walks away. But now that will not lead to a deal with Russia.
In a way, Mr. Bremer, isn't that showing the limitations even of America, whether it's with Gaza, whether it's in Russia, Ukraine? There are certain limits, obviously, to U.S. power. And it's also happening at a time where Trump is suddenly pivoting and, as you said, looking at the Middle East very differently, looking at some of the very forces that till a few years ago America saw as prime enemies. The Syrians, for example, whom they identified at one stage as part of the ISIS network. You're seeing a president who seems to flit from one issue to the other. Do you believe, therefore, that Trump now will be taken more seriously by the various stakeholders, or do you believe each stakeholder is going to do exactly what he or she sees in their national interest?
I think that's that black and white framing that you're offering requires much more nuance. That there are countries that are scared about Trump and that they capitulate quickly when he makes demands. Look at the tariffs and look at how the Mexicans have immediately moved to do everything he's demanded on fentanyl, on border security, on Chinese goods transshipments, you name it, on water delivery. Look at Panama, how they immediately try to force a sale of the Hong Kong firm for the ports to an American firm and say we won't charge the Americans to ship through Panama. Military will take away the fees, even though it hurts the Panamanians. Look at how the Iranians are in a much weak diplomatic and geopolitical position, much more willing to accept talks and talk about stopping for a highly enriched uranium stockpiling, all of these things. So I think that weaker countries take Trump much more seriously and are scared of him. More powerful countries, I'll give you another example you didn't mention. Trump puts major tariffs on China. China puts tariffs back on the United States. Trump says, we're going to hurt you. China says, I don't need a phone call with you. We can take the pain more than you can. And Trump is the one that blinks. And when it comes to Russia, so far, Trump has been completely unwilling to put tough sanctions on Russia, consequences. Russia has been unwilling to blink. They continue to engage in their war with impunity in Ukraine. Now, of course, this makes a very interesting question. Where is India with the United States? Is India a strong country or a weak country? You know, when Trump says, I want to work with you, you're part of the Quad, I like you, but then he says, I'm going to hurt Apple if they decide to move their iPhone production from China to India. I'm going to tariff them. He says, there are going to be trade consequences and other consequences if you don't have a ceasefire with Pakistan. I mean, you know, India is a big economy. It's about to become the one of the fourth, going to pass Japan, fourth largest economy in the world, right? A nuclear power, 1.4, almost 1.5 billion people. But is India a strong country that can stand up to Trump, or are they a weak country? I don't think we know that yet. I don't think Modi has been able to display that.
But we've already seen with the India-Pak 87-hour war skirmish, call you wit, Trump announcing the ceasefire, almost claiming that it was a deal that he had done, keeping trade as a carrot. How do you see the way it's all played out? India, Pakistan, the ceasefire, Trump announcing it. What's your sense of what's happened in the subcontinent?
I think India is in a more uncomfortable position. I mean, on the one hand, you know, you saw that Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced that there were going to be not just a ceasefire, but ongoing trilateral discussions over Kashmir with the U.S., India, and Pakistan. India denied that.
Which India, Mr. Brahma, has clearly rejected. India seems to suggest that it was Pakistan that wanted the ceasefire.
That's right. I was about to say that. So India said no to some of what the Americans demanded. The ceasefire has stuck. I think everyone's glad the ceasefire has stuck. I think it's good for India, Pakistan, and the world. But my point is that I think that there is right now, look, Modi is arguably the most powerful domestic leader of a major.
Russia was caught in Ukraine's spider's web on Sunday evening. More than 100 drones, Ukrainian drones, targeted 5 Russian air bases. The strikes were carried out from within the Russian territory. And how exactly did Ukraine carry out these absolutely stunning drone strikes? Now, that image that you see on your television screen. Now, this is very interesting. These were containers, and this is, of course, AI generated. Ukraine is believed to have hired, through its people inside Russia, a factory where these drones were put together using commercially available material. And then they were loaded onto those big trucks. And 117 Ukrainian operatives inside Russia at those 5 different locations. Some of them were 4,000 kilometers apart, from the north to the south, east to the west, when they targeted 5 different air bases in Russia, and the manner in which they did. 117 drones covertly transported into Russia, concealed within these wooden log cabins or boxes mounted on container trucks. Now, the roofs of these container trucks were remotely opened. Then 117 operators controlled these drones from perhaps inside these trucks to target the strategic bombers of Russia at 5 different locations. And almost all had already been used in strikes against Ukraine or were likely to be used. And in Ukraine, it said this was a preemptive strike. So the 5 bases were either, and we will show this to you on the map in just a moment, between 2,000 to 4,000 kilometers away from the Russia-Ukraine border, deep inside Russia. Belaya, for example, as you can see in that image, Belaya is about 4,800 kilometers away. Ivanovo is 300 kilometers away from the border, from Moscow. Let me also tell you about some of the other bases that have been targeted. Diaghilevo, for example, is 200 kilometers southwest of Moscow. What were targeted? They were Tu-22 and Tu-95 bombers, and A-50 AVAX, Airborne Early Warning Command and Control System. It's Ukraine's most audacious attack on Russia yet, launched from near. Now, these massive trucks and containers, they went very close to the air bases. Then the top of the containers came off, and the drones flew out and targeted the strategic bombers, the Tu-22s and Tu-95s, just a couple of kilometers away from the roadhead. And this just shows the thought process that went into it. 18 months planning. More than 40 long-range bombers have been destroyed. Like I was telling you, I want you to look at each and every place. Belaya's, for example, is about 5,500 kilometers east of the Ukraine border. That's how deep Ukraine was able to strike. Ivanovo is 300 kilometers northeast of Moscow. Diaghilevo is about 200 kilometers southeast of Moscow. Olenya, it hosts a nuclear-capable aircraft. Now, these bombers are nuclear weapons capable. They can carry a conventional warhead. They can carry a nuclear warhead. One of the biggest strikes, which is not extensively being spoken about, is the Severomorsk base, a marine base that has been targeted, and this base hosts the nuclear submarines. A damage to the submarine, we are not sure, but the base indeed has been targeted, as you can see in that image. Now, my colleague Sandeep Unnithan and I, we take you to our special studio for a moment where we try and break down Ukraine's Operation Spider, the numbers and the losses to Russia.
I'll tell you how Ukraine's special forces launched these drones to target Russian Air Force bases deep inside Russian territory. Now, Russia's strategic aircraft are parked deep inside Russian territory, something like 2,000 kilometers away from the border with Ukraine. Now, what Ukrainian special forces, what their secret service did was to send a number of containers on normal civilian trucks which were driving past these Russian strategic Air Force bases where the aircraft are all parked in the open. On a pre-programmed signal, these trucks automatically opened these containers and launched waves of first-person view drones to attack these aircraft that are parked in the open. And literally destroy them. It's a simple, effective plan, but took months of preparation, and it was all about planning and rigging up these containers so that they could be opened at the right time when the signal was given. Something like 100 drones were used, and each of them costing about $1,000. First-person view drones, quadcopters like these. And as these trucks drove close to the Russian Air Force bases, they were launched in swarms, and they went and they destroyed these parked aircraft. This is one of the largest deep penetration such raids in the history of Special Forces operations. It will be studied for years from now. It's literally the gold standard of how to carry out an attack of this nature 2,000, 3,000 kilometers away from the border with Ukraine. And the sheer spread of the targets, something like 5 Air Force bases across 6,000 kilometers of territory across multiple time zones of the Russian Federation, all of them targeted through this one strategy of weaponizing the logistics chain, planting these Trojan horse kind of containers packed with special quadcopter first-person view drones that were targeting all of these aircraft parked in the open. Ukraine claims something like 40 or 41 of these strategic bombers were destroyed, and they used drones that were costing just about $1,000 each. So you're looking at an operation mounted with such complexity, but using very low-cost tools and sheer human ingenuity.
Operation Spider's Web is perhaps the most audacious attack mounted by Ukraine on Russia in a war that's been on since February 2022. It took 18 months, and let me now explain some of these big numbers. 18 months to plan this operation from the time it was on the drawing board to its execution. 117 drones were launched by Ukraine. 117 drones at 5 different air bases in Russia. And none of these air bases are anywhere close to the Russia-Ukraine border. In fact, when you look at the distances, if this is the border, the closest is about 2,000 kilometers away, and some which are about 4,500 kilometers away. That's the level. And 5 in the north, in the south, in the east. That's how far Russia was targeted by Ukraine. 5 air bases, 41 aircraft destroyed, 41 strategic bombers from the Tu-22 supersonic strategic bombers. Now, they have been used to bomb Ukraine very extensively, and that's actually like the main strategic bomber of the Russian Air Force, and the Tu-95s. Along with that, the A-50 AWACS. Now, AWACS, again, very, very important because they are your eyes in the sky. Advanced Airborne Early Warning Command and Control System. None of this is very inexpensive or cheap. According to Ukraine, their assessment is losses to Russia stand at a staggering $7 billion in one major attack. And this is how massive Ukraine's counterstrike on Russia has been. But will this lead to peace or a massive escalation in Russia's retaliation on Ukraine? And will it be restricted to Ukraine, or is this war now set to expand? That's the biggest question right now. Now, what is this quadcopter? What is the first-person view drone? It's being talked about so extensively. Let's show you what the FPV or this drone actually looks like. It's not very big in size. It's a small, commercially available in many instances, a quadcopter, but it has the power of an anti-tank guided missile. Enough explosives to take out a tank. It has the range of a mortar. It can hit something which is even 5 kilometers away. That's the endurance, the accuracy of a sniper rifle. Because the operator of the first-person drone can look at the target, guide the aircraft, and then it slams into the target. It can fly horizontally and it can fly vertically. It can go high, it can go low. It's GPS independent navigation. It can change its speed. It can even change its direction. So if it overshoots the target, it can even return to hit the target. What's extremely unique about the FPV is it can go around the corner and it can take out a target. So if you can see a target, you can take out a target. What's even more amazing about the FPV, or the first-person view drone, the person who's flying it, who's operating it, on his lens, he can see, the specs that he's wearing. He can see the flight of the drone. He can see if there's a window, it can go through that window. It can go through doors. It can swing around, and it can come back. It transmits the video back to source till the time it hits a target. The cost, less than a couple of $1,000, much, much lesser than launching a cruise or a ballistic missile. But look at the impact. Impact is much more. So what was a drone like this all about? So the FPV, or the first-person drone, or this quadcopter, if I may, in this instance, was designed for drone racing as a hobby. The FPV, or the first-person view drone, is now actually a weapon of war. It can be a quadcopter. It can be shaped like an aircraft. That's the one that's been used by Ukraine in Russia, often fitted with explosives. It could be 5 kilograms of explosives, 10 kilograms of explosives, pre-fragmented explosives, because that causes tremendous damage on impact. It flies straight into the target and explodes on impact. Now, the Atlantic Council says these drones are extremely attractive as far as warfare is concerned because, one, they're extremely inexpensive. They can destroy a tank, an armored personal carrier, a vital asset or a vital point. It can damage an enemy bunker. It can fly through the enemy bunker and destroy it. It can destroy enemy positions. The FPV drones can be manufactured. It can be manufactured at home. For a few $100s, almost every part is, except the explosive, of course, is commercially available in the market. And that is why, since 2022, it's a weapon of choice in the Russia-Ukraine war. It's given Ukraine an edge compared to a militarily superior Russia. Let me now bring in our guests on this special broadcast, because this attack has been described as the most audacious. It's been described as stunning, the deepest strike into Russia by Ukraine. It's also been described as reckless. These are some of the adjectives that have been used. What will it lead to? Escalation or ceasefire? Is it reckless to even talk about expansion of conflict beyond Ukraine to other parts of Europe? Is there a real apprehension that this could lead to NATO versus Russia directly? Joining me on this India Today special broadcast is Lieutenant General Raj Shukla. He's former army commander and a commentator on strategic and military affairs. Ambassador Kamal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary of India, has also been our ambassador to Russia. Professor Andrew Latham is an expert on international relations and regional conflict. He joins us on the show. And Jill Bandola is a non-resident fellow at Defense Priorities, and he's a senior research fellow at the Center for Study of Statesmanship. Of course, Sandeep Punithan, my colleague, stays with me on this broadcast. And General Shukla, the most audacious strike on Russia when you look at the scale, size, and result.
Mind-boggling, Gaurav, mind-boggling. I don't know how to describe it. A couple of months back, we saw President Trump telling President Zelensky that you have no cards. I think Ukraine has told Mr. Trump and the world that we have some very significant cards. Ukrainian ingenuity has penetrated the impregnable Russian nuclear force. Look at the manner in which you have targeted strategic aviation. You have targeted the maritime leg of the nuclear triad. You have hit the heart of the command and control system of Russia's nuclear force. So to me, it appears that, Russia's nuclear architecture, its first strike options, its second strike assuredness, they are gaping holes there. And all the points that you brought out, the technological innovation, the precision strikes, the thermal imaging AI, the psychological architecture, and it proves that technological innovation is the response to legacy militaries and legacy platforms.
Yes.
I would say tomorrow, in the next 48 hours, India should announce the creation of a drone missile force.
Oh,
Dronery
absolutely.
as a science and art has come of age. I have been screaming for the last 3 to 4 years now. This is the
Yes.
first thing we need to do. Now, the only
India
thing
needs
to
a
be seen
massive
is that
drone force.
do
Absolutely.
we introduce dronery as a separate service or dronery as a separate arm? It is like infantry, armor, artillery, a separate arm. And for a while now, Gaurav, 80% of Russian casualties in men and equipment have been caused not by infantry, not by armor, not by artillery, not by air power, but by drones. We must
Yes.
humbly acknowledge the arrival of dronery. It is as significant a moment as that. And
That's a
if
very
we do
significant
so,
point you make, sir.
just 130 seconds. The point
Go on,
you
sir.
made about costs. When the military component of the power differential with China is $450 billion, one way to bridge it is by investing in unmanned platforms with dronery as the icing on the cake.
That's a very significant point you make, sir. Ambassador Sybil, imaginative planning, but you've also described it as reckless. Why do you think this is reckless, sir? Because many in Russia are describing this as Russia's Pearl Harbor moment.
But isn't that reckless? That Pearl Harbor brought America into the war, and Japan was ultimately incinerated with 2 nuclear bombs. Do we want that to happen in Ukraine or in Europe? This is totally. Look, as a military man, uh, General Shukla is absolutely right to draw military lessons from this and draw military lessons for our own security. And what he's advocating in terms of paying more attention to drone warfare and creating a separate drone command, these are legitimate lessons to be learned from this operation. But that's not the end of the story. There is geopolitics involved. There is war, serious dangers of war on the horizon. You humiliate. It's humiliating for Russia. You humiliate Russia. You attack its nuclear bombers, and you expect that Ukraine will get away with it. And do you think that Ukraine did this alone? First of all, I think, now this is speculation, that they were internal collaborators in Russia. I mean, you can't, or there were such gaps in their in their internal security that these trucks could go in various directions, and the Russian FSB, their intelligence agencies, had no clue as to what was happening. So clearly, there are weaknesses and deficiencies in their system. But to imagine, as was said earlier, that this was being monitored 4,000 kilometers away or 2,000 kilometers away on some screens by the Ukrainians, this is nonsense. There is a hand of Western intelligence and military intelligence agencies and military in this. This is a kind of a quasi-NATO operation. Now,
It's
the
a
thing is,
quasi NATO operation. Sir, would you say Europe or America or both?
well, America is not separate from NATO. Do you think? Do you think Trump controls all this? Now, point is, if Russia attacks and it blows up into something big, then will we be all celebrating or will we be paying the price? It's the global south that will be paying the price if there is wide-ranging war in Europe. It can't be insulated there. Therefore, I don't think that this is a thing that we should celebrate at all. At all. We should be very, very thoughtful and introspect as to what the consequences of this be. And the worst is that when, let's for a moment say that Trump is sincere in trying to find a peaceful solution.
Okay.
And first talks, peace talks in Istanbul happened. The second round was about to take place, and this is when Ukraine triggered this. Now, why did they trigger this? Because Europe and earlier on the Biden administration always believed and said publicly that if negotiations take place, Ukraine should negotiate from a point of strength. And now
Yes.
they believe that this gives them that kind of strength that they were willing to
Okay.
have before negotiations began. And secondly, of course, they're not interested in negotiations. Europe is not interested in negotiations. One of the European leaders, in fact, has said that that war is worse than peace in Ukraine. So I think we should understand the implications for our own sake, for the sake of the global south, for the world in general. This is total
Yes.
recklessness on the part of Ukraine and its backers in Europe.
Professor Latham, is there also your appreciation? One, it's reckless. Two, it's a huge blow to the prestige of the Russians. There will be massive retaliation. And do you agree with Ambassador Sybil that this is a quasi-NATO operation, can't be Ukraine on its own?
Well, there are a whole bunch of questions there. I am Professor Latham, but I'm also a former Canadian Army from a long time ago, so I just want that on the table. But more importantly, we need to get the facts right. First of all, a lot of these drones were shot down, because they always are. Secondly, some planes were destroyed, some were merely damaged. Third, these planes are not being used extensively in the Ukraine war. And that brings us to the most important point here, which is that this is theatrics. It's not strategy. It is not going to change the battlefield one iota. I don't embrace this reality, but it is a reality. The Russians are winning the war on the battlefield in Ukraine. And none of this theatrical nonsense is going to make a jot of difference. None of it. And so I don't think Putin is going to retaliate in any major way. It's not going to escalate into a nuclear war and a war against NATO or anything like that. Putin and the boys have a clear sense they're winning the war incrementally at huge cost, but they're winning. And this little theatrical episode is not going to change that dynamic in the slightest.
Okay. Jill Bandola, is that also your appreciation that one, this is theatrics? This will not help Ukraine either, win the war or change the dynamics on ground?
I agree with Professor Latham to some extent. I think it's not going to change the fundamental battlefield dynamics, and I agree that the idea of major Russian escalation. I mean, I think the only real escalation there is nuclear, and I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think this is going to prompt that or prompt a wider conflict with NATO. But I do think that Ukraine's center of gravity is keeping its army in the field, and to an extent that is keeping the population in the fight. And there is war weariness in Ukraine, no question. And I think that these things, I wouldn't just dismiss them as theatrics. I think they're important for what they show in terms of Ukraine's ability to reach into Russia. And I actually think that's probably unilateral. And I think it's also important for what it does for Ukrainian civilian morale. I mean, I think sometimes, Kursk is sort of an example of this. Some of these things can be counterproductive if they're done just to increase Ukrainian morale and have battlefield consequences.